What are the Sacramento Kings doing? It's a question that's been asked a lot over the history of the organization, and especially in this year, 2025. I've done my best here on Locked On Kings to try and make sense of the new direction of the Kings. But outside of Sacramento, a lot of people are either shaking their heads, scratching their heads, or rolling their eyes. Josh Lloyd of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast is one of the best national perspectives that we have here on the Locked On Podcast Network, and he doesn't hold back with how he views and sees different situations around the NBA. He joins me to break down the Sacramento Kings and what he thinks or is confused about what's going on here. It's all right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all offseason long. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News, and I, like many of us Sacramentans, we're very protective of our city. We're very protective of what's real and what isn't about the Sacramento Kings organization and the misinformation or the low-hanging fruit that's often taken and run with by whether it's the national media or just fan perspectives around the NBA outside of Sacramento. We know the Kings are a punchline a lot of the times, and we know that a lot of people use that in an unfair way to discredit, disregard, or straight up ignore what the Sacramento Kings are doing. So when I seek out national perspective, national media opinions on the Sacramento Kings, I'm very intentional about who I look for. And Josh Lloyd is always somebody that I go to because while Josh has his fingers on the pulse of the entire league and tries to watch all 30 teams, he does a phenomenal job on the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, giving you just a league-wide perspective on what's going on around the NBA and, of course, how it pertains to fantasy, and he'll help you win your fantasy leagues as well if you are participating in fantasy basketball this upcoming season or any season. But Josh does pay attention. And what I love about Josh is he asks questions, right? Off air. What is this? Like, why are they doing this? And how does this make any sense? Like, I appreciate that about Josh because he doesn't just take something at the surface and that's as deep as he goes and formulates an opinion based off of that. And he's also, of course, not afraid to share his opinion. So every time I have Josh Lloyd on Locked On Kings, he usually brings the pessimism, which is understandable based off of the history of this organization. But I wanted to bring him back on so we could go back and forth and kind of figure out together and talk about what the direction is of the Kings organization, the moves that they've made this offseason, if they make sense, if they don't make sense, what they should prioritize. And Josh, I think, provides a lot of really interesting conversation, really interesting opinion context. I don't think you're going to agree with everything that he says. Some of you might not agree with anything that he says. That's okay. It's meant to be a conversation. If you want to respond to anything that Josh and I talk about, please do so at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or feel free to leave your comments in the comment section down below this video if you're watching on YouTube. But for now, please enjoy my conversation with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd. Over the years, I've looked forward to having Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball on so he could share his brutal honesty about the Sacramento Kings, and I could fight him about it and back him off and say, no, Josh, this is national media talk. This is the way it is here in Sacramento. But, Josh, I don't know if I got anything for you this year, my man. The Sacramento Kings are in a interesting place. I think one of the best ways to describe my feelings towards this upcoming season are curious, and I don't know if that has negative or positive connotations at this time, but Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball joining me here to break down where the Kings are at and share his perspective on the direction, if there is one, what the Kings, if anything, are doing that makes sense or is right. Josh, we'll just go with first impressions. You look at this roster, this organization, in an all too familiar position of having a new head coach. They tasted success for 1 year and then it's gone up in flames. What is first impressions just of the Sacramento Kings, how they are right now today on August 14th, when we don't even think their roster is finalized still going into training camp?
Yeah, that's the thing, is that I hope that some of the rumors that we hear are not going to come to fruition, because that would make even sort of less sense than some of the things that they've done. And it's always a delicate balancing act with a team like Sacramento, because obviously there were different goals. Like, we haven't made the playoffs for so long, we got to get there, and they did it, right? And they did it with great success and unbelievable hype and all that energy that was around the team. But the moves after that, we sort of to me, from an outside top-down perspective, I could sort of see exactly where that was going. Oh, they're not trying to make this a continued or build for actual real long-term success. Like, that was fun. Can we try maybe that again? And then but sacrificing some of the things that you had that made it good to push yourselves from okay, that's good. That's a start. Now let's go to the next step. And now let's go to the next step. And now I think you want to talk about where the direction is. I know that you're probably aware of this, Matt, but to me, the direction just feels like whatever Vivek wants. And I don't know that he knows what he's doing in this sphere of business / basketball. It's I've got a team, I'm going to play with it, I'm going to do fun things. And his instincts all generally appear to be wrong. And that seems to be the problem. And then it's the thing, I'll fire this guy and bring the guy in who's going to agree with me. And let's see what he does. And then we'll move on from the next guy and we'll move on from the next guy. But you could all trace it, I think, back to Vivek's idea of I like Zach LaVine, so should we get him 1 year? Then maybe we don't get him that year and we try it the next year. Then we eventually get him and okay, so now what? And it's just, let's get Vivek's favorites in on the team. And honestly, sometimes the people that we might place the blame on, players, coaches, management, or they're just going to be what are you going to do? This is what I'm being told what to do. I'm being overridden in my decision making. And it all just filters back to Vivek, I fear.
I feel like it's been made pretty clear at this point what became of the De'Aaron Fox, Zach LaVine trade. That as much as we can say it was Monte McNair's move as the general manager, I think it's been made perfectly clear that, one, Zach LaVine's been a name that has been on the radar of ownership of Vivek Ranadive for a long time. And number two, Monte was, for lack of a better term, and it's kind of disrespectful, but Monte was a dead man walking. And I think everybody kind of knew that. And it was made very clear by the second that the Kings were embarrassed by the Dallas Mavericks in the play-in game. Literally the second that game ended, Monte was saying his goodbyes and the announcement came out that the Kings were moving on from Monte McNair. So I say that to ask you this. There is a concern, and I know I've shared these concerns too. They've quieted down for me since hearing the press conference of Scott Perry and hearing the press conference of Doug Christie. But there's been a concern that the Kings hired Perry without even doing a search. They reached out, asked for Perry, he took the job. No search. They just went out and got Perry. That's who they wanted. And they clearly had been talking to him before Monte was fired.
Yep.
Then you have Doug Christie, who is named the head coach by Perry, and they did do a search, to be fair. However, Doug has been here in Sacramento for a while, and there was a question of, is Doug being groomed or primed for that position? Was he always the plan? So do you, from your perspective, again, those concerns have quieted down for me a little bit now that, because I already know Doug and I've talked to Perry a little bit and I understand who Perry is and how well respected he is around the league. But from your outside perspective, was the way Perry was hired and the way Doug was hired, does that send up any alarm bells or red flags for you?
To me, again, just the reality of the situation, Matt, is that, look, when the Kings do something and Vivek does something, and if I've got any sort of I'm not sure, I'm going to lean to you don't have the track record that I'm going to trust this process, right? Because why would you? Okay, we could say this is an unequivocal home run, which I think most people did when they hired Mike Brown, right? Okay, we love that idea. But again, when we talk about Doug Christie, who was there last season, I don't know that he changed a huge amount from when Brown was fired and he was already on the staff. But again, when you go, hey, look, maybe there is a process here, but let's bring in a legendary Kings player who was, I believe, a Kings announcer at one point, and then he was the assistant coach, and wow, he just happens to be the best man for the job. I'm going to sit there and go, yeah, I don't know about that. Maybe he could be. But again, when there are a few other things that are associated with that, I'm just going to be like, is it because Vivek likes him? Is it because Vivek goes, you played very well for the Kings when back in the day, and you worked for me as an announcer, and you probably said nice things about me on the TV. Now, can we push you into that job? I don't know. And then Scott Perry also has a history working with the Kings as well. He's had some stops in other spots and all that sort of stuff. And I'm not really sure where that goes with that idea. Again, I'm just going to default back to this idea. Like, I don't know if Doug Christie is the best man for the job. I don't know what the other options were. Well, I'm not sitting on the interview. It's really hard to know with the coaches. But when it's like, here is a legendary Sacramento player who was the Sacramento announcer, and he was an assistant coach, and he took over the job last year, and just miraculously, that's just the best guy available. I'm going to say maybe not, but again, could turn out great. I don't know.
On the actual court itself, one of the things you first said was you hope that certain things that are rumored to happen don't happen. The most obvious one that I know you're talking about is the Russell Westbrook rumor or connection that the Kings are very interested in Russ. But there's a Jonathan Kuminga aspect of that too, because it feels like the Kuminga situation, it's quieted down recently, mostly just because we're at a stalemate standstill, and we've been so for basically a month. But that is the first domino to fall to spark the Kings maybe getting Russell Westbrook, and the Golden State Warriors getting like Al Horford and other guys too. So we're just waiting for that domino to fall still. I know how you feel about the Russell Westbrook aspect, and feel free to say why you feel like that would just not be a good decision for the Kings. But for the Kuminga aspect, are you concerned about that as well, from being a target for the Kings, especially with them being willing to include Malik Monk and a, as of now, protected first-round pick to go out and get him?
I am, and it's every sort of thing where we talk about in the NBA and teams moves, it's all context related, right? Is taking a flyer on Jonathan Kuminga as a team that sort of needs that sort of a player, does it make sense at the right cost? Like, sure. Like, I can make things make sense at the right situation, but him coming in and a guy that's shown limited ability with his passing or your defensive awareness and positioning and shooting, and then you're going to play him alongside Domantas Sabonis, and then DeMar DeRozan is there. And like, where does that make sense? Plus, of course, he plays the same position as Keegan Murray. So how's that going to work out? Like, who's going to the bench? Are we going to convince DeMar DeRozan to go to the bench? Are you moving on from that contract that you gave up an unprotected first-round pick swap in 2030 with the Spurs later on? Like, how's that going to work out? Like, it's all of those things. Like, if a team that needed this Jonathan Kuminga situation and it was a fit, it would make sense. But I don't get the fit. I've got DeMar DeRozan with the ball. I've got Domantas Sabonis with the ball. I've got Zach LaVine with the ball. So where does Kuminga fit? And we're just, again, further pushing back the talent that you'd started to develop, like Keegan Murray, to a degree, like with Keon Ellis, what they've done with Schroeder and the rumors about Russell Westbrook. I don't know what sort of look, Kuminga's young, obviously. There's room for him to improve and maybe become a good player, but the glaring need on this team, I don't think he feels it. Like, he doesn't fit that need outside of being younger. But when the core of your team is all older on expensive contracts, like, then they all go, and then like you're left with Kuminga being the person who's like, again, your feature player. Is that what you want as a guy? It's just, the fit doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem to address what the need would be on this team. It pushes some of the other players who maybe could grow into those roles further out of the role that they need to be in. And how does it elevate you to be better? I'm not really sure. I don't think it does.
Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of Locked On Kings is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all of their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, their properties, or their investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can actually end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on the go on your phone. Monarch does all the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in full control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Linking your accounts is super easy, and when you do so, Monarch Money will break down everything that's going on in your daily life. That was a game changer for my wife and I and our spending habits, and finding out how much money was going to different areas, breaking down all of our subscriptions and reminding us, hey, you've got the subscription that maybe you enjoy, but you could do without, and you can get rid of really, really quickly. That's just a taste of the amazing things that you can do on Monarch Money, including building your savings up for a big purchase in the future, just getting back on track, managing joint accounts and separate accounts. Monarch Money does it all. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off of your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA.
The idea, or like the selling point of it, to which I've heard Kings fans kind of talk about, I even talked about it to some extent here on the pod. If you go out and you get a guy who's younger, I think Kuminga's 22, that is a piece that you can actually build around for the future. Well, because Josh, I have this, the only thing that makes sense to me is like this 2-year plan for Scott Perry. Over the next 2 years, you're locked into these contracts that I don't believe Scott would have ever signed or acquired in the first place. I know for a fact Scott would never have made that Fox for Zach LaVine trade in his own mind. But you're locked into these contracts. It is what it is. You've inherited this mess. Okay, for the next 2 years, I'm going to ride out these contracts and try and be as competitive as possible, knowing full well that I'm not close to a championship. I'm not going to make a silly all-in move to try and enter a championship window with this group. We're going to be a play-in team and maybe sneak into the playoffs for the next 2 years. And then once those contracts come off the books, then I can start to execute my vision for this team. Kuminga potentially provides not necessarily a shortcut, but here's a guy that I could get and bring in that for the next 2 years can just kind of fit with what they're doing, but we can start to build him into the vision of being a core once those 2 years are up. Again, I don't know if I'm trying to sell a used car here or and talk myself into it making sense, or if it does make sense, but that's where I'm curious about your and others' perspective on that being a logical plan for the Sacramento Kings to try and execute.
I can understand that rationale behind it, Matt. Like I get that idea of like, these guys, we'll ride it out, but like Kuminga's been riding out his career, like playing for the 4 years in Golden State behind other guys, and has very clearly not been happy with it and hasn't done the things that the coaches have wanted him to do. We've seen that stuff come out, and he's really pushing back on this idea. I don't want to be in Golden State. They don't know how to use me. I'm much better than this. So like while you're writing out these other contracts, like where is he fitting in? Plus, as you're well aware, Matt, like in 2 years, like a million things changed. Where was the Kings team 2 years ago? Like it's a very different story. So you're waiting 2 years for all this to happen. And who knows what happens with Kuminga? Maybe you've invested this money, you've given up a pick, you gave away Malik Monk, whatever else you did. And then he's there for 2 years and you go, he's actually, the reason he didn't play that much in Golden State is because he actually is bad. And that development didn't come. And he's discontent because he's still playing with these other players. Like making this 2-year plan is fine and having a plan for it. But I don't know if investing in a player waiting for the 2 years to come and then seeing what happens when we've already had these levels of discontent with him and his role. Plus, you run the risk of annoying some of the other players on your team who are then going to be pushed into other sort of roles who have been waiting for that opportunity as well. I don't get what that upside is. Like, so if you want to take the positive side, I get that. He's young. He might develop into a really good player, but he's also one of those guys that I fear, Matt, that like, we know how an NBA game works. We know there's a certain amount of possessions on either team, right? Everyone's going to get their shots up. Like players who are bad, I'm not saying that he's a bad player, but players who are bad, if they're playing on a bad team, can get 25, 6, and 5 easily because somebody's going to take the shots, right? So we could be in that situation where we wait and then these other guys go and then Kuminga's the lead guy and then you win 32 games anyway. So is he one of those guys that can fit into the roles that he needs to? That's where I always have that doubt with what he is, because putting up numbers is easy on bad or easier on bad teams, and it can change the opinion of what a player is. But again, the idea that this is the sort of play, again, when you've got win now players and the sort of player you're getting doesn't fill any of those gaps and you're waiting to see what happens in 2 years when everything can change in 2 years' time. It just seems like another one of those ones like Vivek, like, I want to be like the Warriors. He played for the Warriors. Let's get him. And, big points. Let's go.
We had a great conversation on the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast when we were previewing the Sacramento Kings, and a major topic of that conversation was Keegan Murray. What are the Kings doing with Keegan Murray? How are the players that they're bringing in or keeping here impacting Keegan Murray primarily in a negative way?
Yeah.
I'm curious about, because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, like you're of the perspective of like give Keegan a shot, see what you've got, give him opportunity, because if you're going to have a core beyond these 2 years, Keegan should be a part of it or at the center of it as a former number 4 overall pick. I'm curious about optics. Can Doug Christie or Scott Perry or the Sacramento Kings, optic-wise, ever get away at any point this season? I don't think it's going to happen at the beginning of the year, maybe by the trade deadline, or maybe if they're 10 games under 500. Can the Kings optically get away with DeMar or Zach? We're paying you that much money. Zach LaVine's, you're almost a $50 million per year player, but we're going to cut some of your minutes so that we can give Keegan Murray the green light and opportunity to take 15-plus shots per game. I understand the theory behind that, but optically around the league, does that look terrible?
Yeah, I think it does for a number of reasons. That's why, look, a few years ago, I came on this show to talk about the Kings, and I was, not critical of Keegan Murray. I was like, I think we need to just sort of watch the expectations, because I'm not the highest on him, but I also think that he's shown an ability at times when others are out to ramp his usage up and be solid. I don't think he's a number 1 offensive player or anything like that, but I also don't understand why you would continue to suppress any chance of seeing where that can go. In terms of the optics, like again, last season when we did a show together, you were celebrating the idea of like, hey, DeMar DeRozan chose Sacramento. This is the biggest free agent signing that we've had. And then if you 1 year later, you go, yeah, thanks for that, DeMar. Thanks for coming here. Thanks for choosing us. You mind coming off the bench now? Like we're just going to push you aside for the last 2 years of this contract. And I know you're a great guy, great locker room guy, but like, you're a bench guy now, and then he's got his connections and he's well loved in the league, and then agents and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know. You're right. Like when we get to it, I don't know how you do it. How do you because there is seniority is a thing in the NBA. It's a thing with agents, with managers, with coaches, and that experience that he's had. Like DeRozan's a hard player to fit other guys around, and the Kings seem to have a lot of those guys there, which is why I'm always sort of critical of some of the roster construction stuff. But yeah, I would. The easiest way in general to be able to create opportunities for players that you want to see is to not have other players in their way, because there is going to be, you can call it locker room politics or backroom politics or whatever, but people talking across the NBA. And I don't think that the Kings would have, and their management / ownership have the greatest reputation amongst other teams, because people know what Vivek is like and the way that he runs that team. So anytime you do something that then pisses off like a almost universally loved player from what he is as a person and a teammate in like a DeRozan, and even like no one ever says anything bad about Zach LaVine. There's concerns about, hey, the contract or the encore player or winning or whatever it is, but these are not players that are like, don't worry about that guy, he's terrible. We don't care what his opinion is. These guys hold a level of sway, and that stuff needs to be navigated cautiously, because it can do like significant damage.
The way optically you could do it in a way that makes you come out looking like somewhat of the good guy, at least, is, hey, DeMar, we're at the trade deadline. It's not working out here. We want to try and maximize your opportunity. We're going to try and send you to a contender so you can play some meaningful basketball. Problem is, now I'm taking pennies on the dollar from a team that knows I'm just trying to move on from DeMar DeRozan and that contract. We don't even have to talk about Zach LaVine's contract to know nobody in the league is going to want to trade for it, except for the Sacramento Kings for some reason.
Well, do you think? Okay, here we go. Do you think that Portland and the $100 million of Jeremy Grant would take Zach LaVine back in exchange to get get Grant off their books and bring in LaVine? Not that LaVine makes a ton of sense in Portland, but Grant's a worse player, but he's probably a slightly better fit. I don't know, because they're both maybe that's what you have to do. You have to trade an untradeable contract for untradeable contract.
It could be, and then in theory, you could put Grant to the 4, move Keegan to the 3 finally, and get a look at that. But again, you're trading. I mean, that's something that's going to be hard to sell even your own fan base on, let alone the league on it being a good move. But again, that's where Scott Perry, one of the things I said, and I was not obviously in the negotiation room when Perry took this job. But I imagine Perry says, I'm only accepting this job if you give me 2 years to clean up this mess without any judgment. You just have to give me the green light and accept that I'm going to trade away fan favorites. And there's positive and negative ways of going about that. I think the thing that fans are the most critical of Perry so far is the decision not to extend or give Keon Ellis an extension, or not to,
decline the option and make him restricted.
Exactly. So, and now there's the risk of, did you piss Keon Ellis off to a point where he doesn't, he leaves an unrestricted free agency next year? You also have a Keegan Murray extension to worry about. I understand the theory behind we need to find a point guard now, we need as much flexibility as possible. Keon, we're going to kick this can down the road a little bit, but does that potentially burn a bridge and you lose one of the good young things that you have going for you here in Sacramento? I mean, you could pair that decision with like his decision to bring in Dennis Schroeder and offer Dennis Schroeder the 3-year deal. And I'm just very curious about like how much of a leash does Perry have to clean up this mess, and how much is he willing to sacrifice fan favorites to do? I mean, it's public knowledge that the Kings are trying to move on from Malik Monk, and Monk is beloved here in Sacramento. So I think it's good that you have a GM that's willing to move fan favorites to make the team better, but you've got to make the team better.
You do. And like I think the last sort of GM, and maybe this is someone else that I'm sort of missing in this regard, but like the team that was sort of always a treading water sort of a team, and then new GMs came in and they very clearly convinced ownership that like, you know, we're tearing this thing down and we're rebuilding it the right way, was in Washington, right? Where they would constantly chase the 8 seed and they'd sign terrible contracts to their players that were there. And then they got the guys in like Winger from the Clippers with the Thunder background on a lot of those guys as well. And I said, right, like we're going to be one of the worst teams you've ever seen. We're tearing this stuff down. We're building up with young prospects. We're cycling guys through. We've got some veterans in here. We'll try and recoup that. We're going to build up an asset chest, and it's going to take a lot of time. And you can see how bad they are. Like they're terrible. Like at times it's unwatchable. And they're just going to cycle through guys to try and build it back up. But that's not saying that the Kings are going to necessarily be that way, but that is that last GM who came in and said to ownership, give me these years, like give me the opportunity to actually rebuild this thing in the correct way and get all of these past mistakes off the books. You can have your DeMar DeRozan is your Bradley Beal analog, not the same, but you know, like this older player, respected player, incredibly large contract, Levine, whichever player you want to do. And then they find ways to get off of them, and they trade them for nothing in the end. And you know, it's very limited stuff that comes back in these deals, and they make themselves deliberately worse in order to clear out the mess and create these things. Because the thing you mentioned also before about DeMar DeRozan, and like maybe you talk to him and say, well, at the deadline we'll move on from you to contenders. The problem is that do those contenders, you know, want him? Like how, like he's a tough fit. Like how do you get all this stuff to work? So in a lot of these cases, you're just going to have to be, in order to build this stuff in this correct way, we're going to have to like, yeah, here's a second round pick swap or something. Like, you know what I mean? Like that sort of thing that comes in. You go, well, just the benefit for us is not having the player there and not having the salary on our books to open up other opportunities. Not like we're going to trade him, we're going to get this high potential 25-year-old future all NBA player, and that's going to be the swap. And you know, there's a small downtick now, but it's this huge uptick. It's like you got to go really down to be able to push it back up. And then some of the moves that happen, you mentioned the Schroeder one, like if you're having this 2-year plan and you're like, we need to get a point guard, don't get a guy who's like your bottom third starting point guard at best, who's already older, who I don't know that helps you win now, but also doesn't help you build anything for the future. So you're sitting in a middle area where you're also limiting opportunities for younger guards like Carter and Ellis. Not that they're necessarily guys that are point guards that can run the team. It's just, I feel like there's just a lot of mixed messaging about some of the decisions that get made.
Josh, you're a genius on the fantasy basketball side as well. So, of course, you're looking at the Kings and every team through that element. You've got, I think, 3 players, 2 of them for sure, in Sabonis and Levine that are capable of putting up at least big fantasy numbers. So that might be a reason for people to pay attention to Kings basketball. But again, the word that I used at the beginning of this podcast was curious. I think there's a lot of curiosity around the Sacramento Kings with a skepticism. I think a lot of people are going to tune in to watch Kings basketball when they play one of their 9 national TV games and get ready to kind of laugh and mock and chuckle at, oh, look, here are the Chicago Bulls West fumbling along again. Like the curiosity comes with, I'm curious to see what it looks like, but I don't have great expectations or good assumptions about this team. But for you, in terms of, if you're sitting down to watch a Sacramento Kings basketball game, in addition to the fantasy analysis that you do, what is it you're watching for? What is it that draws your attention, intrigues you, or are you, for lack of a better term, watching to watch the dumpster fire?
I think the way that I watch a lot of these things is a little bit different. Like I don't want to watch something to sit there and laugh at it. Like I want to see how things get figured out and then what that means for what happens with Keon Ellis. Is he playing like 16 minutes a night for some reason because Russell Westbrook and Dennis Schroeder and Zach LaVine are taking all the backcourt minutes? Like, is Keegan Murray's usage down again? Has he completely forgotten how to shoot? Is he broken mentally? I don't know what it is that's happening there. Yeah, can we see changes in games? Like we to DeMar DeRozan's credit, he decided he was going to take more threes last season, and he did. Like he hit, I think, over one a game for maybe the first time in his career. It's close to that anyway. So yeah, there was changes in those games. It's more about how when I'm watching these sort of things and watching, because there's always something interesting on any team, right? From my perspective in my job as a fantasy analyst and someone who's watching the entire league, there's always interesting things that are happening at all points. I'm not going to sit here and go, oh my God, I can't believe that, LaVine did this on defense. That's so like weird. It's more like, okay, how are they approaching playing these guys together? What combinations work? How does that extrapolate across to other teams in the league? What could shake free here? Which guys do they need to move on from? Are they hidden gems on the bench that could have opportunities in different situations if they happen to shake free? Like, what are they doing at backup center? What's going to happen with Nick Clifford? Is he going to find a rotation role? Is Maxime Reynaud, could he play at all next to Domantas Sabonis? Like, they're the sort of things that I want to see. Like, is Reynaud, if he actually profiles or translates into a guy that maybe protects the rim and shoots threes, does that give you an archetype? Although we've seen Miles Turner play with Domantas Sabonis, but Sacramento decided we're never trying that again. But like, can you find that? Is that sort of a player able to work at all in this sort of a situation? And where are these roles? Like, is Clifford someone who beat up on kids in summer league, or is he going to be a rotation player and play 20 minutes immediately? Like, they're the interesting things. And because then, like, we circle back to before I talked about, like, in 2 years' time, if you don't have answers to these things, I don't know what Reynaud is going to do. What's Clifford going to do? Where is Alice going to go? Because Clifford might come out and you go, yeah, this is just like, he's actually unbelievably good. He's shooting 40% on threes. He's defending at a high level. And then if we move on from DeMar DeRozan for a second round pick swap, as a joke sort of a deal that I'm talking about, but like, Clifford could step in and he's good in that role and he's there. But like, what if he's not? And we don't know the answers to those. They're the sort of things that I want to find out. We're a team where there's so much confusion about roster construction, management direction, and all that sort of thing. I want to see if they've got pieces in place that make sense moving forward, and then what that can augur for the future of the franchise, and hopefully create a little bit more direction. Because like, it's fun when teams are good. I want teams to be good. I want teams that have been starved of success to have success. Anytime there's an NBA Finals matchup, someone will go, who do you want to win? I go, the team that hasn't won a championship. Like, I want everyone to experience that success. So I want to see the pathways to that. And then also, when teams do stuff that makes no sense, I'm going to call them out for it, because in the end, like, even though it feels like it's anti-team or anti-fan base, it's like, no, I'm actually saying the things that I think that the team is doing as a disservice to the fan base. And I actually want the fans to have a better experience rather than sit through this, Matt, like, 16 out of 18 years or whatever it is.
Well, let's end this conversation like a preschool therapy session. The father of a 4-year-old is going to come out of me here, Josh, but let's end like a compliment or something that for this team that you are positive about or encouraged about, or like, man, if it's a lot of nonsense, but I'm latching myself onto this thing about, I think the Kings did something right here, or this is good, and hopefully they can figure out how to make more of it.
If I was going to give a funny answer, I'd say, well, at least they don't have Jay Crowder on the team again this season. Although they do have Doug McDermott back, so we're not going to fully go there. What I want to see what, like, if there is an extra gear to what Keon Ellis can do. Like, can he do something different? Because he shot the ball well, Matt, but like, is that the limited sample? Is that able to ramp up? How are they going to use him in that situation? Where does Keegan fit in? Also, there are players that are fun. Like Zach LaVine, when he is going on offense, is fun, right? As much as people criticize him, I think he shot 46% from three last season. I believe it led the NBA, and no one talks about it. Like, everyone just talks about him like he's a disaster because the contract is bad and he defends at a poor level. He was, I believe, the highest three-point percentage guy in the entire league last season, and that's fun. He can go off at any point, but when you're replacing franchise favorites like De'Aaron Fox, it's always going to be a hard thing to get into. Like, Sabonis is going to do fun things. We're going to see LaVine do those things. Whether it all turns into wins or not, at times it doesn't. But there are fun things on this team to watch. There are fun young players. I think they killed it in the draft. I love what they did. I want to see these guys get playing time. I want to see how they work some of these guys into certain situations, and hopefully they can make it make sense.
I can't wait to watch 16 straight points from Zach LaVine and the Golden One Center to cut an opposing team's lead down to 12. Can't wait. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. Kings fans, I'm kidding. We actually, like, Zach put on a show a couple of times for us in the limited time that he was here last year. So there's a hope of that. There's also, knock on wood, a hope that he played, I think, 72 or 77 or something like that games last season. You hope that he can do that again, because we know about the injury history too. Josh, you'll keep us from the fantasy perspective, the league wide. If you want to win your fantasy league, listen to freaking Josh Lloyd. I can attest to it. I finally did halfway decent in fantasy last year because I took Josh's advice and stopped being stubborn. So check out the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast. Josh, he does not hate the Kings. He just is real about the Kings. Josh, I appreciate you making the time as well, my friend. And one day I'll bring you on after a championship, and you can still find what's wrong with the championship.
Once we get that success, I'll be all about it, and I'll be celebrating along with you guys.